Hello everyone in CSC-121 Graphical Python Programming. We are still working through the checklist for week 11 on module 6 in databases. So in this video to create the example database, we wrote the Python code using the Qt module to create the database for projects and tasks. We also created the tables for projects and tasks. So this video will have to be done after the database is created and after the tables are created. So make sure you watch the first walkthrough before coming to this one. So as a review, this is our task and our projects. Remember the relationship that we could only have one project with a specific ID, but that project could have multiple tasks associated with it. So in the first video, we created this Python SQLite database using this program that we wrote. So I'm going to start DB Browser and look at that database again just to review what we were doing. So it's in my downloads and DB folder, and here it is. Here's our projects table. Here's our tasks table. And right now we have no data in either one. You can see when I'm on the Browse Data tab, there's nothing there. So we're going to have to insert data in a specific order. We said that there was a relationship going on here between projects and tasks, and that a task must have a project for whatever project ID that we key in here. That means that we have to populate the projects table first. We have to insert a project, a row for a project, into our projects table before we can insert any task. So that's the order that we're going to go about writing this program. So let's go ahead and look at this particular example that we wrote. And it looks like I've got it open here somewhere. Let me close my YouTube stuff. Yeah, right here is that example. I told you when we created this that we could reuse some of this code, and we can. So we can go ahead and reuse this much of the code. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard and create a new one and paste that in. Okay. And this one will be insert rows with Qt. We're going to use the PyQt5 QSQL module. So file, save as, and we'll call this insert rows with Qt. Save that. Okay, so we've got a little head start because we know we need a connection to our database, so we've got that much done already. Now, there's another lecture on SQL injection. That's an IT security issue that so many people don't consider. It's a really, really big issue. So we have material, and you should watch that lecture before watching this one so that you understand why we're doing certain things. So, okay, let's create a function to create a project and actually insert a project row is what it's going to do. Def create project, and this function is going to take in a Python list. The list is going to have the data that's going to be inserted into this row in the database for a project. So that list, we'll just call it project, and that's a Python list object. So we'll create a query, QSQ, got to be capitalized, QSQL query. That creates us a query object. Now we're going to use a parameter query. There are a lot of advantages to that. First off, using a parameter query takes care of a lot of SQL injection security issues, but it also runs faster. So there are several reasons why a parameter query using that is a good idea. So we're going to use the prepare method to create an insert statement with some parameters. So insert, this is SQL that we're writing, insert into, and then we tell it the table name. Table name is projects, and then we're going to give it a list of column names. So our column names will be name, begin date, end date. Okay. Now, because we have that ID column in the database, QSQLite or SQLite is going to automatically assign an ID to the project. So that's kind of nice for us that we don't have to worry about that. So we're creating our first part of our SQL statement right here. Okay, and then we've got another part of it. Whoops, let me go back here. Another part of it, and that's the values part. And this, if you've worked with databases in the past, then you know that we have our insert into, where we list the column names, and then here we provide the values for those. And the values have to be in exactly the same order as what you listed up here. So here's where we're going to make our little placeholders, our parameters. And the way Qt requires those to be done is with a colon. So we just made a placeholder for name. Now we're going to make a placeholder for begin date. And now we're going to make a placeholder for the end date. Okay? Because we put that colon in front, this is, Qt knows that this is a placeholder, this is a placeholder, and this is a placeholder, and they're named placeholders. So after we've created our query, our parameter query here, we will then bind things from our project list to these individual values right here. So let's do that next. You do that with a query.bind value method. That's what it looks like, bind value. And first thing that it expects is the name of the parameter. Okay, and then here's where we tell it what to bind it to. And remember we said that project up here was a list, so we can get to the first item in the list by using our index or our subscript right here. So this is saying bind the very first item in this project list object that was passed in to this parameter when we run this query. So I can copy this line now that I've written it and paste that in again and make sure that it's indented right, and just change this part to be begin date, and that will be project 1. And the next one, we can paste this again and fix the indent, and this will be end date, and that will be project 2. So remember, Python lists start counting at 0. So this is the first element of the list that was passed in right here. This is the second element. This is the third element. And that extra space there is going to bother me if I don't take it out. So, okay. So now that I've got all my SQL query prepared, I've got all my parameters bound, I can run that query. And this is the way we run it. Result equals query.exec. That runs that query. So we prepared it here. We're running it here. Okay? So last thing we'll do is return that. Whoops. Return it. Return result. That'll just be something that we use. This is actually going to have the ID of the row that we inserted, so that actually works out pretty well for us. Okay, so we've written the code to insert a project row. Now let's write the code to insert a task row. And again, I'm following the convention. This is a list that's going to get passed to our create task function. Okay? And this much is going to be the same. So I can copy that and not have to type it again. Okay? So insert into task. That was the name of our table. Here we've got to list all the columns out, and this is going to be long because there are more columns in there. Name, priority, status, ID, project ID, begin date, end date. Okay, so that's our first part. Our second part is going to be the values clause. Remember, it looks like that. Okay, so this bracket or this parenthesis matches that one, and then there's our values. So let's get started with that. Placeholder, we'll call it name, Placeholder, we'll call it priority. Placeholder for status ID. Placeholder for project ID. Placeholder for begin date. Begin date. Placeholder for end date. Okay, and that's all of our columns, or excuse me, all of our placeholders. Here are our column names here. Okay, and they have to be in the same order as what we listed here. Alright, so next we can bind some values, and I can actually steal this one to use as a pattern. And the first thing is name, but it's task 0 instead of projects, right? Okay, because that's what's getting passed in here. So can copy that and paste it. Whoops. I don't know why it's giving me those extra things there, but we'll get rid of them. That's going to be task 1, and this is priority. Okay, I'll copy this again and try it. See if maybe it works a little bit better this time. Yeah, it did. Next one is status ID. And that will be task 2. Remember, we start counting at 0. So we're just listing off the elements of our list here. And this is going to be the next thing. We had name, priority, status ID. This is going to be project ID. And that's task 3. This next one is going to be begin date. Begin date. And it's going to be task 4. This one's going to be end date. And it's going to be task 5. And let's see if they're all there now. Name and name. It's the first one. Priority, priority. It's the second one. Status ID, status ID. It's the third one. Remember, we start counting at 0. Project ID, project ID. It's the fourth one. Begin date and begin date. And it's the fifth one. Yep, looks like they're all there. Okay, so we've got all those bound, and then these two lines are going to be the same, so I'll just copy them and paste them here. So here we run the query, and here we return the result. Okay. So now that we've got those two things created, we can create our main function. Okay, and our main's going to drive the whole thing. Again, database equals, you remember what the little r does, it makes us a raw string, where if we wanted to put some special characters in there, we could do it without having to escape. That's the name of our database. And we're going to create that database connection. and that's just a connection equals call our function create connection. Okay, and then we'll have our if statement. Remember, if we didn't get it open for some reason, then we wouldn't be doing this stuff. And next, let's create a project. Row. Project row. Actually, it's insert, whatever you want to call it. Create/insert a project row. So to do that, we'll call our function, and remember that our function is going to return something to us as well. So project, this is where we're going to make our tuple. A tuple is the same thing as a list, except it's read-only. We can use a tuple for this because we're not changing anything in here. So let's go with it then. Cool app with SQLite and Python. That's the name of our project. What's the next thing that's getting passed? We just did name. Next thing in the list needs to be the begin date. So we remember that's a text field in our database. So 2020. We'll make our date 04-02. That's when I'm writing it. Next thing is our end date. When we want this to end, 2020-04-03. How's that? That's our end date. Okay, so we've just created a Python tuple here. It's a tuple because instead of square brackets, we use the curved parentheses. So project ID is what's going to come back to us when we call this. Create project is the name of our function, and we'll pass project tuple into it. So we're defining this tuple here. It's got 3 things in it. Here we're passing it to our function to create a project. So it goes up here. That comes in. It's got 3 things that we're using right here. Okay. So the result of that is we get back a project ID. We can then create our task, and we'll create 2 tasks. For this project. Task 1 is going to be a tuple, and we'll say analyze the requirements of the app. That's our first thing. The next thing is going to be what? We'll give it priority 1. Okay, priority 1. What's the next thing? Status. We'll give it status 1. Okay. What's the next thing? Project ID. So we got the project ID back when we created that new project, so we can use it here. And the next thing is the begin date and end date. Now we got our project ending 1 day after we started it, so why don't we make these 2 end on the same day? Got one too many dashes there. So this is going to start on the 2nd, and it's going to end on the 2nd. I'll copy that and paste it right here. Okay, So that's our task 1, and I'm going to copy that and paste it here and change this to be task 2. And the first item there is the name or the description of the task, and that task is going to be confirm with user about the top requirements. Still give it a status 1 and a priority 1. Same project. This we're going to have it done on the 3rd. Okay, so we've got that. Let's call our functions to create these tasks now. And so we've called the function to create the project. Now let's call the function to create the task. Create task. We'll pass it task 1. And I'll go ahead and put an underscore here on these. Okay, so create task 1. Create task 2. All right, we need to close our database connection. Either way, whether we got it open or not, I guess we can close it. Close the database connection. And actually, I think it only should be closed if we got it open. So I'm going to close it right here. Okay. And then the last thing we need to do after we've created our main function, we need to call it if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals underscore underscore main underscore underscore main, then call main. And that's it. We'll see if this works right the first time. We'll save it. Okay. Just looking it over real quick to make sure nothing stands out that we did wrong. Don't see anything, so let's try it. So this is our insert rows. And it looks like something happened because we didn't get any errors. So if you recall, our database is right here. I'll open it up with DB Browser and we'll take a look at what's in the tables now. You remember on Windows I gave you that portable app. I've actually got it installed here on Linux, so I don't have to go to a folder. I can just do DB Browser and open up that database and browse the data. And here's our project, and you can see that it assigned an ID of 1 to it, and so everything looks good there. Let's look at our task. You can see we did not supply this ID to those when we called those things. This number right here, ID 1 and 2, was generated automatically by the database. So we didn't pass the ID for that row. And really, you wouldn't know it ahead of time unless you did another query to get the max row ID. And then there's some issues with that if there are multiple people hitting the database. So it's actually better in a lot of instances to have the database actually assign that ID number to it. Here's our project ID right here, and you can see it references project 1. So that's the end of creating this insert rows with Qt. It's a little bit less work to use this than using the SQLite library, like the examples that are out there in Blackboard are doing. And if you recall, the reason I recommended using the PyQt SQL is because if we wanted to change this to use a different database, we basically can usually change this line, and you may have a different line here for set database name. You may not, depending on which database you use. But these are the only two lines that you should really have to change in your program if you wanted to use this code against a Microsoft Access database or a SQL Server database or an Oracle database. So that's why I recommended using the Qt instead of writing code that was specific to SQLite. So as a reminder, go watch the video and read through the information on SQL injection attacks. It's a type of hacking that folks do against databases, and you'll hopefully understand that the reason we use name parameters and parameter queries here are to stop a lot of that SQL injection stuff that people do. So good luck. These two parts give you enough of an example to create the project that you have to do this week. That project needs to get done this week because next week you'll be doing more with this project. So if we go here and look at the project, what I'm talking about is this project 6 right here. Okay, and if we come in here and look at project 6, you'll see that you are creating a database that is named vehicle log, VEHLOG, and it's got a vehicles table in it. This is similar to the project table that we created, and it's got a maintenance table. Now you'll notice that the maintenance, whatever, this is some vehicle maintenance that was done on the vehicle, and you'll notice that it is related to the vehicles table using the VIN. So maintenance VIN is related to vehicle VIN. Okay, so you only have to create two tables here: the vehicles table and the maintenance table. If we if we were doing this for real life, we would all probably want a fuel purchases table as well. So this goes through and gives you the SQL already. You don't even have to write the SQL. You can paste it in. You will have to write the SQL for the other two tables. Okay, so that's project 6. And remember, you've got to have this done in order to do project 7. Good luck.